Hello and welcome to the Healing Insight podcast, episode 9, with me, Sarah Hunt.
And me, Jez Hunt.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here again. And this evening, we're going to talk about. I've messed that up.
No, you haven't. This evening, today, this episode, we're going to be talking about, shall I do it? Forgiveness. I forgive you for your naff introduction. Hey ho. It's okay. You can forgive yourself, Sarah. It's all right.
Okay, thank you. Do you want me to redo that bit?
No, let's leave it in. Look. Okay, listeners, this is real life. This is how podcasts sometimes go. And at the end of the day, we're human. It's okay.
Yes, it's very true. Sorry, I was just having a moment there because we're recording this evening, although you'll be listening to it whenever you're listening to it.
Exactly.
So, yes, forgiveness, hot topic tonight. Obviously, as Jeremy said, he forgives me. I forgive myself for that little blip. But let's look at forgiveness and see if we can get a bit of an understanding of the importance of it with moving forward in life and on your healing journey.
And on the podcast.
Yes. Oh, dear, oh dear. Okay, so forgiveness, Jay.
Oh, you want me to say something now? Because you're still trying to get your head around what to say. Forgiveness, yes. I think, okay, so forgiveness to me is at multiple levels. I think we can think of forgiveness of being forgiving someone else for wronging us in some way. So maybe we've had a past relationship where it didn't work out because of the relationship fell apart for whatever reason, but maybe they did something wrong, in inverted commas, which we then haven't forgiven them for. So therefore there is possibly an energetic, a negative something attached to that situation. I think lots of people maybe view forgiveness in that sense of having to forgive someone else, or, well, I can't forgive him for doing that. I can't forgive her for doing that kind of thing. But I think it also goes way, way deeper than that, because it's not about forgiving. I say it's not about, it can be about, but it's not just about forgiving someone else. It's about forgiving yourself for your part in that, whatever that is. So
Absolutely. I often get clients say, oh no, I can't forgive them for that. I can't forgive. What I then explain to them is that forgiveness isn't about condoning what's actually happened or what's actually been said to them. It's about letting go of all the toxic stuff that's related to that. Because when you're not able to forgive somebody for something they've said or something they've done, what you're doing is you're harboring a lot of negative emotions. And those emotions harm you the most, because it's anger and resentment that are bubbling away under the surface until you explode and project it outwards. So forgiveness to me is key. It's a really important part of healing, and it's something that everybody can work on. I agree with you that there's layers of it. And it's not just about forgiving the other person involved or other people involved, because we allow situations, we have choices, and therefore we can choose to allow somebody to hurt us. We can choose to stay in a situation that's not good for us, or get involved with something that's not good for us or not for our highest good, or we can choose not to. And so learning to forgive ourselves as well as forgive others is a really important part of the healing journey.
Yeah, yeah, and you said an important word there, and I think this is it's like an underlying theme to all of this in terms of the podcast that we're doing. It is choice, and into own self development and finding your own life journey is that we choose what we do, because like we said in previous episodes, we can choose to react or respond to something. So somebody who is taking advantage of you, at the end of the day, you are allowing them to do that. You are making the choice to allow that to continue, if you allow it to continue.
Yeah.
So that, if you don't assert your boundaries and say, whoa, hang on a minute, no, you're not doing that to me, then if you don't assert your boundaries or say no, and they continue doing it, then you are allowing that to happen, because you are choosing to not respond to it in the way that actually is the right way for you, if you want to not allow that to happen to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And of course, if you're not asserting yourself, and that's very different from being aggressive. Being assertive is standing your ground, standing in your own power. But if you're not asserting yourself and your boundaries, and you're allowing things to happen, then you're not showing yourself any self-respect. And also, this comes back to loving yourself as well, because if you don't love yourself, then you will allow things to happen that when you're further down the journey of healing and you've realized that you need to love yourself more, you wouldn't allow to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So your choices when you're in a situation where you're not really loving yourself, you haven't got a lot of self-respect, will be very different to your choices further down the path, when you've done some work on yourself and come to understand yourself better and why you are where you are. So that the choices would be very different if you have a more loving relationship with yourself, and you have gained self-respect and gained self-confidence and gained self-esteem. And then you would feel much more comfortable with actually saying, no, actually, that's not going to happen. I'm not willing to accept that. So it comes back, I feel, to understanding the importance of loving yourself, which we talked about in the podcast that we called Fly for Yourself. Because when you truly love yourself, then you have self-respect. You start to stand in your own power, and you start to recognize when things aren't for your highest good. The other way I look at forgiveness as well is it's an act of love towards somebody else, when you're willing to let go of all the toxic energies that and emotions that have been created because of whatever happened. And you get situations where people have done some real injustice to somebody else, and the family go, yeah, we forgive them, and people are like, oh, how can they possibly do that? But actually it's an act of unconditional love, from my perspective, by being able to do that and say, yes, we forgive the person for that. And this comes back to levels of consciousness as well, to me, because if you've got a low level of consciousness, then you're not looking at things from a loving position, and your moral compass will be very different to somebody who's got a high level of consciousness. So the things that you will do, somebody else who's further along the path of learning to love themselves and has a higher level of consciousness wouldn't do those things, because to them, with their moral compass, that wouldn't be right. But when you're forgiving, if you can recognize that that person is where they're at on their journey, and they have the knowledge that they have at that particular moment in time, you're not condoning what they've done. You're just recognizing that they're not as far along their journey as you perhaps are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's doing it in a non-judgmental way.
Yes.
So the few things there that is worth just reiterating, I think, and picking out at. The first is you're not condoning their action. So it's not saying, oh, well, they were right in doing that or whatever. It's not condoning their action when you forgive somebody. It's forgiving the behavior.
Yes.
And the behavior is based on the experiences, the beliefs, the values that people have in that particular moment of time. And then, because the choices we make are dictated by the experience, the values, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves in that particular moment. So if so it's about understanding that we are where we are in any particular moment, and we can only make what we believe to be the best decision in that moment based on where we are, as you say, where we are on our journey.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to pick up on the behavior you mentioned. It's the person's behavior, and behavior is different to the person. It's different to the
Yes.
soul. And I, when my children were small and they used to play up, I would say to them, I love you, but I don't like your behavior. Your behavior is not acceptable. So I was trying to get them to understand that still love the person, but it was the behavior that they were displaying that wasn't acceptable.
Yes.
And I think that's important, even with adults. It's not the person that's the problem, it's the behavior that they're displaying, which, as you mentioned, goes back to what they know, what they've experienced. And when you are able to recognize that it's behavior that's not acceptable, then it gives you the opportunity to show more compassion.
Yes.
And more love towards them, because actually what these people need is love, and they don't understand what love is. And so it's really important to be able to take that step back. And as you rightly say, it's not about saying what they did was okay, because it wasn't okay, but it's helping them to understand why it wasn't okay without judgment, so that they can learn from the situation,
Yeah,
and grow from it.
absolutely. I mean, everything that happens is a learning experience if we choose to allow it to be.
Yeah.
We and when you actually view life like that, and you view, okay, so this person's done this to me, and that's made me feel, or I felt, not made me feel, because you choose to feel, but and I felt this because of it, then that's also a learning experience for you. It's then down to whether you challenge that behavior in terms of asserting boundaries and saying, well, excuse me, but that's actually not acceptable, and have some form of dialogue or communication around that, or whether you choose to ignore it or turn a blind eye to it, or whatever other way that you choose to deal with it in that moment. Bearing in mind that if you don't confront the things that are highlighted to you, they will come back and bite you in the bum, usually in a bigger way further down the line on your journey. So
Yes, absolutely, definitely. And it's interesting as an energy healer, because I find layers of unforgiveness, and often with someone who in their current situation is having difficulty perhaps with a colleague at work, or maybe a family member. And what I find is layers of unforgiveness, where they've not been able to forgive them for things that have happened maybe earlier in their life, in another lifetime. And so that energy's got compressed down inside them, and they've shoved it down, and they've shoved it down, and then they're confronted with these people again, and it's getting triggered, and they get angry, and they don't really understand why it is. And then we do a bit of energetic work to discover what's gone on, and often it's something that's happened that they've not been able to forgive them for. And when I can clear those layers of unforgiveness, out of the way, what I find underneath is the way it's shown to me is a box with forgiveness in that's kind of locked, and I have to get that unlocked and let that forgiveness go. And what that does when it's done energetically is start to soften the relationship so that the person can then start to come to terms with the idea of forgiveness on a more conscious level.
Yeah, yeah.
And that changes the dynamic of the relationship, and allows them to then have some kind of dialogue without that anger and resentment that's sitting underneath that they don't really know why it's there.
Yeah, and I think another thing to be aware of is another approach that people can take is the tit for tat scenario, where someone does something to you that you feel is wrong to you, and instead of that, stepping back, responding, whoa, hang on, what's going on here? That's not acceptable behavior, all those things we just talked about. But instead going down the, well, they've done that, so I'm going to do that back to them kind of approach, because you're still not, this is part of this pushing down the layers of not just forgiveness, but of everything else in terms of your emotion, because you're getting drawn into their drama.
Absolutely.
And, you know, that's quite a common thing. I see it in coaching. It's quite a common thing that we as people can do.
I see it a lot as a healer as well.
Yeah.
And it's important to be able to recognize what is your stuff and what is somebody else's, and not get drawn into someone else's stuff.
Yeah.
Because we've all got enough of our own to sort out without getting drawn in and pulled into somebody else's. And of course, that's a distraction then. And I've certainly seen it where people have used being pulled into somebody else's drama as a distraction from their own stuff and going inward themselves. And then I get people that want to rescue people as well. And that's perhaps another day's topic. But certainly, you know, when you get pulled into somebody else's drama, it's very easy to become a rescuer and wanting to sort that out for them. And equally, if you're pulled into that drama, the person that's in that drama may want to be saved. And so you get this situation where you've got somebody wanting to be saved, somebody wanting to be the rescuer, and actually the issues don't get sorted out, because we can only sort our own stuff out. We have to go inward. We have to be willing to look at ourselves, look at where there needs to be forgiveness, and be willing to forgive ourselves. And I think that's a really important thing that you said right towards the start of this session, was about learning to forgive yourself. And you know, it's a difficult thing to forgive yourself, because you know, we're hard on ourselves. Well,
yeah.
All I can say is I certainly in my lifetime I have been very hard on myself at times, and unforgiving towards myself, and not recognizing that actually I'm human, and I'm having a human experience at this point in time, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to get things wrong, and to learn from it, and not berate myself for having made a mistake or made the wrong choice, or because actually everything is neither good nor bad. It just is, and I'm putting air quotes up here, wrong choices are just different ways of learning. And it might be a harder path of learning rather than a different choice, which would have perhaps taken you along a quicker route to that bit of learning. But it's all learning. It's all discovering more about yourself and understanding yourself more, and what makes you tick.
Yeah, absolutely. I had on a podcast I was doing a while back, Gary. So I do another podcast, as you know, but for listeners, I do one with, about business related stuff, and because I've just cleared 23 years of being self-employed this year for my first business. I know, it's awesome. Gary said to me during the podcast that, you know, so is there anything that you would change about what you've done over the last 23 years to do with your businesses and the way that that's progressed? And as I said to him then, you know, I wouldn't change anything. If I could go back and do everything again, I wouldn't change anything. And I'd say that genuinely, because I would not be the person I am today in the way that I am today if I changed one little thing, it's the butterfly effect, or there are various ways of thinking about it. All the little micro changes you could make, the end result would be massively different. But I am genuinely comfortable and happy as the person I am today.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I haven't got stuff I'm working. I've still got stuff I'm working on, and I'm still on my journey. But I genuinely wouldn't change anything, because everything that's happened to me has been a lesson that's led me to the understanding I have of me today.
Absolutely, I would agree with that completely. And when I look back at my career, and I've had a very varied career, going from nursing into the corporate world and then to running my own business, I wouldn't change anything either, because I know that everything that I have been involved with has been to get me to the point that I'm at now. And all the life experiences I've had, I know have made me the person that I am now. And I'm like you, I'm very happy with where I'm at, and still have stuff to work on.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, it's about becoming comfortable in your own skin, isn't it?
It is. And I think I've definitely said this before. I think one of the hardest things that we can do in our human experience is look at ourselves and I was going to say be critical. Be critical, but in a loving, forgiving way. So looking at yourself and saying, actually, it goes back to what you're saying about, I don't like the behavior. I love you, but I don't like that behavior. Looking at ourselves and the behavior we display in certain situations and saying, actually, I'm not happy with that. I want to change that behavior. I don't like that about myself. That's okay. Because when you're aware of that, when something triggers in you in that way and you become aware of it, you can then do something about it. It's when you're not aware of it. How can you change something you're not aware of?
Absolutely. And awareness for healing, whatever level of healing you're doing, whichever path you take with healing, having the awareness that something needs to be addressed is the biggest step to actually changing things and creating a slightly different pathway forward. But if you don't have the awareness, you haven't got a starting point, have you? So it's really important. I think the other thing is that's really important is honesty. And you have to be honest with yourself. And sometimes that's really difficult, when something's flagged up to you and you need to kind of go to yourself, actually, yes, I can be like that. But if you're not honest with yourself, then it's a much harder journey of healing because it's harder to actually identify what needs to be looked at. Does that make sense?
Yeah. At the end of the day, if you're not being honest with yourself, you're only kidding yourself. It's not affecting anyone else. As in, you not being honest with yourself is only stopping you from progressing.
Yes, absolutely. And if you are working with someone who's facilitating things for you to help you to heal, then being honest with yourself allows you then to be honest with them so that they can guide you in the right direction. If you're not willing to be honest with yourself, then it makes the therapist or whoever it is that you're working with's job a lot harder to actually help facilitate the healing for you.
Yeah. I think another thing that's important, going back to, obviously we talk about forgiveness, and I think it relates to forgiveness as well, is it's okay to ask for help. Oh, no, it's not okay to ask for help. We need to ask for help. We can't do everything on our own without assistance. In that, yes, we have to go within to find the answers, but sometimes we need something external to trigger that within us. Whether it's a situation that occurs where someone does a air quotes wrong to you, or whatever it is, there is something that needs to trigger for us to then go within. But it's okay. It's actually a strength to say, actually, I need help.
Yeah.
And quite often we can shy away from the asking for help bit. Whether it's we try and deal with it ourselves, which depending where you are on your healing journey. But when I started out, my dealing with it was shoving it down and ignoring it.
Yeah, I do.
So, and I'm sure lots of listeners at some point in their journey and their life can relate to that. But as you get further along and you start to realize that actually that's not helping, then you do get to that point of actually it's okay to ask for help. It's not a weakness. It's actually a strength to say, okay, I recognize this in myself. I recognize that I want to change this, but I don't know how to do it.
Absolutely. And then that just means that's with that additional help, it just kind of, the person can help draw the information out that will help to sort out what the problem really is. Getting to the root cause is really, really important. And often unforgiveness is a big problem that is connected to the root cause of issues with people, especially where, with the relationships with others. And it's created a situation where there's an awful lot of resentment and anger and that's been buried, and an understanding as well that forgiveness doesn't, when it's heart-led forgiveness, it doesn't happen overnight. So if you've been upset with someone and you've not been able to forgive them, it's not necessarily going to be an instant, oh yes, I can forgive them now. It's going to take a bit of work to understand why that happened, why you allowed it to happen, what do you need to address to then be able to say, okay, yeah, all right, I can forgive now. I can forgive myself for allowing it to happen. I can forgive them. I can see what I've learned out of it. And
Yeah.
often what I find is with my clients is that forgiveness starts on a soul level first of all. So I'll actually connect with them on a soul level and ask their soul to forgive first of all, and then that will trickle down into the conscious level when they're actually in a place where they're ready to actually be able to say, you know what, yes, I can forgive now.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. So, forgiveness.
A complex subject, and one that I think a lot of people have difficulty with, and certainly in my years of working with people, I've had many people say to me, I can't forgive. But as soon as I've explained that forgiveness is about letting go of the toxic energy that's affecting you, and that it's an act of love, a love towards yourself as well as love towards the other person, then it's made it easier for them to understand. And when they've understood as well that they're not condoning, I think a lot of people kind of think, well, if I forgive, then I'm saying what happened was okay. No, you're not saying that at all. What you're saying is, I don't like the behavior, it's not acceptable, but I'm not going to hold on to all of the anger and resentment that was created because of that situation. I'm going to let it go, because then that allows us to move forward and make changes.
And yeah, and something that's just popped to mind. So, particularly if it's taking some time, it's not necessarily instant, as you said. But another way that you can do, you don't necessarily, depending on what the situation is, but you don't necessarily have to confront the person.
No.
You can, I've used this with clients where I've got them to write a letter. So, for example, there was a client who had some unresolved issues with a parent who had died, had passed on. So it wasn't in the human physical sense, it wasn't a case of sitting in front of them and saying, right, this happened when we were children and blah, blah, blah. But what they did do was write a letter to that parent, basically putting their side across of, I love you unconditionally, but this behavior was not acceptable and it's affected me in this way and blah, blah, blah. And they did whatever they needed to do to release the energy of it that they had held on to from childhood through. So you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily about having a confrontational discussion with an individual. You can do it and let go of it energetically without necessarily putting yourself through that, unless it's right for you to do so.
Absolutely. And also when you're forgiving someone, you don't have to go up to them and say, I forgive you.
Yeah, yeah,
You can sit quietly and just go inward and just send out the love and send out the forgiveness to them. And that will do the work. So it's not about having to confront a difficult situation
yes,
or having to say to them to their face, I forgive you. It's about doing it on a more sort of subconscious level, if you like, conscious but
yeah,
subconscious.
yeah,
Conscious in that you have a conscious awareness of what you're actually doing, but subconscious in that you're sending those thoughts out, you're sending that love out to the person, and you're telling them on a subconscious level, you're communicating with their subconscious and with their soul, and you're saying to them, I forgive you. I recognize that you were doing the best you could with the knowledge you had at that particular moment in time.
yeah,
And so I forgive you. I don't want to hurt anymore. I don't want you to feel hurt anymore. And let's just let go of this and move forward. And by doing that, depending on whether you still have contact with the person or not, that can change the relationship quite considerably. And where there perhaps was awkwardness or people avoiding each other, then they may actually start to communicate on some level in a better way
yeah,
going forward.
yeah. No, I think it was important to add that in that last bit. So yeah,
Absolutely, very important. So, another interesting session. Thank you very much.
thank you. That's been good. So hopefully that's helped people understand a little bit more about forgiveness and how important it is and what it actually means in terms of releasing stuff energetically and moving on with retaining the lesson, but letting go of the trapped emotion behind that that's not serving you. So,
Absolutely, yeah. So, as always, if you've got any questions, please do get in touch with us. Our email addresses are in the podcast notes. And if you would like us to discuss anything that we've covered tonight in more detail, then please let us know. Or if you've got any other subjects that we haven't yet covered, we're open to suggestions. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
and it's goodbye from him.